According to a fairly recent study, optimizing player formations, which is both when a team puts their players on the ice and where on the ice those players go in their positioning, optimizing that can increase that NHL's team scoring potential by up to 15%. That is 15% more goals that a team is expected to score, not by adding more players, not by spending more money, but by simply deploying the players they already have as optimally as possible. Because of this, you can imagine that it is absolutely vital for coaches to know how they should formulate their lines and when they should deploy them. And it is also very important for players to know how they should be positioned against the opposing team for every shift of every game. But this is not an easy task because last season every single team had over 50 different lines and pairings that had at least 20 minutes of ice time. That is a lot of different lines and pairings. Teams are changing their lines and shuffling their lines all the time. And so being ready to perfectly counter everything your opponent can throw at every single shift is a very difficult task. So because of this, coaches need a way to efficiently prepare for every single game and to prepare for any line that the opponents might throw at them, and the lines that they see one game could very well be different from the line they see in another game, and they need a way to be able to adapt to that. And so that is where my application comes in. To develop this application, I use the human-centered design model, which starts with emphasizing. So I emphasize in several different ways, and this went out through the entire development process of my application. The first thing I did is I met with a lacrosse performance coach to talk about one thing. Lacrosse is kind of similar to hockey in that they have lines and kind of players come on and off during play. And so there's a lot of similarities with that, and so I used the opportunity to talk with a lacrosse performance coach that I knew to just kind of bounce off some ideas and get ideas of what coaches might want to try and optimize how they deploy their players. I also chatted with a former hockey player and talked with other hockey fans to try and figure out what players might want to know to be able to prepare for an upcoming game, and then also talking with other people to have hockey knowledge to know kind of how to build an application that is easy to use and gives good information. I also spent some time with some collegiate athletes here at Marquette. I kind of watched and noted how they interacted with technology while training, and that to then try and again figure out how to best make my application so that it is easy to use and get the information that you need from it. And I also watched a whole bunch of hockey games during this process, and while I was watching them, I tried to see how I could just simply internally track how the players were being deployed throughout the game to then kind of see what a coach was needing to do during a game, so I can put myself in their shoes to help make an application as useful to them as possible. Next was defining, because to solve a problem, you first need to define a problem. And so when I was talking with all the people that I mentioned on the previous slide, after each conversation, I wrote down some observations, and often during the conversations, I wrote down observations and kind of trying to dig deep into what was the problem behind that information. And I took several of these kind of more important problems in my mind, and I built multiple why-how ladders. You can see one on the right, which kind of shows kind of the reasoning behind coaches needing to prepare for new lines that they have not seen yet, which is something I kind of mentioned earlier. And then I also, as I continue talking with people throughout the development process, I kind of continually adapted and adjusted my approach so that I wasn't stuck in how I wanted to solve it, but instead I was making sure that my solution was the best for the problems at hand. Next up, I also did some ideation because, again, to make an application, you need to have ideas of how to make it. I collected several how might we statements from others. Again, you can see one example of one that I got from Gavin on the right. I also kind of generated several of my own. And I kind of use these statements to help kind of inspire me and figure out what exactly my application needed to do to be the most helpful. And I also asked people kind of given like the problems that a hockey coach needs to solve, what information would they want to help solve that problem? And so I use that to help kind of develop my application. Yeah. And then next up, I prototyped once I had a bunch of ideas of the different things I wanted my application to do. I needed to figure out how I wanted to lay them all out. And so my basic strategy for prototyping is I have a whole bunch of whiteboards and whiteboard markers, including a bunch of small ones which are really versatile and useful for things like this. And so I used markers to kind of draw a variety of different prototypes on these whiteboards. And then I went to some potential users and I asked them to look over the information on the prototype and kind of give me some feedback and also kind of walk me through what they would do when kind of faced with a decision that they would have to make, once again going back to kind of the problems that I had identified earlier, kind of figure out how they would use my prototype to solve the problem. I also then used their feedback to design kind of a better prototype, and then I went back to them and repeated the same process again and again until I got a prototype that everybody seemed to be happy with, or at least as happy as possible as you can make everybody. And then lastly, with the human-centered design, I obviously tested all of my prototypes. My first prototype received a pretty good amount of criticism. There were a number of issues with it, which is to be expected with a first prototype. But I took that kind of criticism and some feedback from people, and I tried to design a new one with their help. I kind of went back to them and talked with a few more potential users with the new prototypes. And again, I kind of repeated this process a couple times until we get what we have on the bottom right, which is, as you'll see soon, very similar to my final application, at least the main page. And then as I continued making more prototypes, I then started giving more and more information. As I started narrowing in on exactly what they wanted, I started giving more information so that my testers could kind of make even more informed decisions and really walk me through what they would do with the information given from my application. And so now we're getting into the application itself. This is the main screen that you'll boot up into. The first thing you will see is that you have an option to select one of several different teams. It has all the teams listed here, so we can say, look at the Dallas Stars. It will then populate, so the teams, some basic statistics, so you get an idea of how they're doing. But then you can also see their most recent forward lines and their most recent defensive pairings. These were from the most recent game. That is something that I learned through my emphasizing, is that information from the most recent game was more important than information from the entire season, at least as far as kind of the line deployment is concerned. You can look up players and select them, or you can also add an entire line at a time. And so if we try this line, you can see the shot map on the right will then populate with all three of the players on that line. And you can remove them, you can add more, so you can add in defensemen to see how those change kind of the look of things there. So like right now you can see identify large scoring spots obviously in front of the net, but then kind of a bit lower on the left side and a bit higher on the right side. And so that is useful information for a team to know if they're going to be playing the Dallas Stars, that when these guys are on the ice, that's where they're likely to be shooting from. You also see statistics, like these 5 guys, they have not spent very much time together, but they have been generally quite effective during the time they've been together. And so that's something that can also be good to note as far as saying this, how good those shots are. And then you can remove players just like this. And if you want to add more players or different players, like say if we remove the defenseman and go back to the Robertson-Duchesne line, let's say you wanted to replace Maverick Bourque with, let's say, Wyatt Johnston, and you want to see what that would look like. Or if you're going up against the Dallas Stars and you see in the practices heading up to the game, they're playing lines with Robertson, Johnston, Duchesne, with Johnston in instead of Bourque, then you can also do this there. And you can know by adding Wyatt Johnston instead of Bourque, there's kind of a little bit more right up in center and maybe a little more shot opportunities up to the left side. And so that's how you can adapt if the Stars were to make that change. And you can also tell they have a decent amount of time spent together and they've been very good during that time. And so if they're doing this, you definitely need to watch out for this line in particular and make sure you have a game plan. And then if you want to start again, you can just remove all of the players and go from there. You can also, let's say if we bring in this line, you can also sort for the game situation, and so you can look at all situations. You can also look at even the shots simply from even strength or during the power play. You can also look during the penalty kill, but not many shots occur when you're killing penalties, so this isn't as useful. You could use that to kind of look at a team's penalty kill unit to see how aggressive they are. More aggressive penalty kills will have more shot attempts, and so that's one thing you could do with that tab. And then we can go over to the player view. From here, you can simply look through. Again, you have the list of the teams. You can select a single player, and so let's say Sandler Stevenson of the Seattle Kraken, and then it'll bring up, once again, the SOT map with just that one player, and you can kind of really look at where that player has been shooting from. But then you can also see that player's statistics, their most common line mates. So you can see Stevenson has played most of his time with Tolvanen, Dunn, and Larson. And then it also has an inbuilt K nearest neighbors model, which shows the 3 most similar players based on their stats. And so this can also be helpful for teams, like if a team is about to play the Kraken and they recently played the Hurricanes, then they might know, okay, Sandler Stevenson, you probably want to defend him in a similar way that you did Jackson Blake, because they are very similar players. And so that's the quick overview of my application. Some alternative approaches. At first, my plan was to look at it from more of like a shift line of like exactly when during a game players are on the ice. But as I was talking with a bunch of other people who knew hockey, hockey fans and coaches and foreign players, things like that, I really kind of came to learn that this would not be very helpful for them. When a player is on the ice, is influenced by so many things, and there's just so much variation that you really can't make. You'd be kind of overreaching if you tried to make hard conclusions off of this. And so I ended up scrapping that for the idea that I just showed you. And so that's another way I kind of used emphasizing and also kind of defining the problems to make sure that my solution was the best solution for the problem at hand. And so, in conclusion, as I said earlier, it is very important for coaches to know how to form and deploy the players that they have on their team. And now, using this application, they can analyze how each of their lines are performing. They can easily compare the effectiveness of different line combinations. They can try out new line combinations, and they can also prepare for opponents' lines, even lines that they have not formed yet. And so this application will definitely help coaches be able to prepare and better deploy their lines, and for players to know where they need to defend so that teams can get, as I said earlier, 15% more goal scoring opportunities. Thank you for your time.